The dust cloud rising from the eastbound stagecoach settled over Pinos Altos, New Mexico territory. As Clara Garrison stepped down onto the wooden planks with trembling legs, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and the weight of her family's desperate hope. She had traveled 3 weeks from Philadelphia, each mile taking her farther from the Presbyterian congregation that had raised her and closer to the small Jewish community her aunt had written about, the one that desperately needed a teacher for their children, the one that promised a fresh start after the scandal that had driven her from polite society. The September sun of 1873 beat down mercilessly, so different from the mild autumn she had known back east, and Clara pulled her bonnet lower to shield her face as curious eyes turned toward the stranger in their midst. The general store owner, a portly man with suspicious eyes, watched her approach his establishment. She needed directions to the Lieberman residence, where her Aunt Sarah had arranged for her to board while teaching the Jewish children who had no other educational options in this rough mining town. "Excuse me, sir," Clara said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "Could you direct me to the Lieberman home?" The man's expression shifted from curiosity to something harder, colder. "You one of them?" he asked bluntly. "I beg your pardon, one of them Jews?" "We got enough of them here already, taking honest Christian business." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she lifted her chin. "I am their teacher, yes. The Lieberman residence, please." He jerked his thumb toward the eastern edge of town without another word and turned his back on her. Clara gripped her carpetbag tighter and started walking, feeling eyes on her from every doorway and window she passed. This was not the welcome she had hoped for, but perhaps it was what she should have expected. Her aunt's letters had mentioned tensions, but reading about prejudice and experiencing it were entirely different matters. She had walked perhaps 2 blocks when a horse and rider came alongside her at a leisurely pace. "That bag looks about as heavy as your burden right now," a male voice said, gentle and concerned. Clara looked up to see a cowboy astride a buckskin mare, his hat tipped back to reveal a sun-weathered face with kind green eyes and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He could not have been much older than her own 22 years, perhaps 25 at most. "Name's Xavier Jenkins, and I reckon you must be Miss Garrison, the new teacher from back east. Your Aunt Sarah mentioned you were arriving this week." Something about his open, honest face made Clara's shoulders relax slightly. "Yes, I am Clara Garrison. You know my aunt." "I know most folks in this town, whether they speak to me or not," Xavier said with a slight smile. "Your aunt's family has always treated me fair when I bring cattle through. I'd be honored to escort you to their home, if you'll permit me." Clara nodded gratefully, and Xavier dismounted in one smooth motion, taking her carpetbag and securing it to his saddle horn before falling into step beside her, leading his mare by the reins. He was tall, she noticed, with the lean build of a man who spent his days working hard under an unforgiving sun. His clothes were worn but clean, and there was an easiness about him that put her somewhat at ease. "I should warn you," Xavier said after a moment, his voice lower. "This town can be mighty unwelcoming to those they see as different. The Jewish families here, they keep mostly to themselves because they have to. Some of the miners and merchants, they got this notion that anyone who does not worship exactly as they do is somehow less than human." "I noticed," Clara said quietly. "The man at the general store made his feelings quite clear. That would be Porter. He is not the worst of them, but he is not the best either." Xavier glanced at her sidelong. "Your aunt said you are not Jewish yourself, that you are Presbyterian. That is going to confuse some folks, you teaching Jewish children." Clara took a deep breath. "My faith teaches me that all children deserve education and kindness, regardless of their background. When my aunt wrote about the need, I could not ignore it. Besides, I had my own reasons for needing to leave Philadelphia. Xavier did not press her on that last part, which she appreciated. They walked in companionable silence for a bit, turning onto a side street where the houses were smaller but well kept, with gardens struggling against the dry soil. "This here is where most of the Jewish families live," Xavier explained. "They built their synagogue at the end of this street, though it is not much more than a house really, converted for their services. But they make do." "You seem to know a lot about them," Clara observed. "Like I said, they have always treated me fair. When my parents died of cholera 5 years back, and I was trying to keep our small ranch going, Abraham Lieberman gave me credit when no other merchant would. He trusted me to pay him back when I could, and I did. A man does not forget kindness like that." Xavier's voice held deep respect. "I do not hold with this nonsense about people being lesser, because they pray different. Seems to me that anyone who treats you with decency deserves the same in return." They arrived at a modest wooden house with neat white curtains in the windows and a small but well-tended flower garden out front. Before Xavier could knock, the door flew open, and a woman in her 50s with Clara's same dark hair and delicate features rushed out. "Clara." "Oh, my darling girl, you made it safely." Aunt Sarah pulled her into a fierce embrace that smelled of cinnamon and home. "Thank you for bringing her, Xavier," Sarah said warmly over Clara's shoulder. "Will you come in for coffee? You have ridden far today." "I would not want to intrude on your reunion, madam," Xavier said, handing Clara her bag. "Nonsense. Any friend of this family is always welcome. Besides, I just pulled apple cake from the oven." Sarah's eyes twinkled with the knowledge that few men could resist such an offer. Xavier's stomach chose that moment to rumble audibly, and he laughed. "Well, when you put it like that, I would be honored." Inside, the house was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of baking and something else, something spicy Clara could not identify. Aunt Sarah's husband, Abraham, came in from the back room, a tall man with a graying beard and spectacles perched on his nose. "Welcome, welcome," he said, shaking Clara's hand warmly before turning to Xavier. "Good to see you, young man. How is your ranch? Getting by, sir?" "The cattle bring enough to keep me fed, and the property taxes paid." They settled around a worn but clean kitchen table, and Sarah served generous slices of apple cake with strong coffee. Clara found herself watching Xavier as he spoke easily with her aunt and uncle, asking after their children, discussing the price of goods and the latest news from the mine. There was a genuine warmth in how he interacted with them, no hint of the prejudice she had already encountered in town. "Clara will be teaching in the synagogue building," Abraham explained to Xavier. "We have 12 children between the ages of 6 and 14 who need proper schooling. The territorial school, they say our children can attend, but—" He sighed heavily. "The other children are cruel, and some of the parents have complained about having Jewish students. It is easier, safer to teach them separately." "That is not right," Xavier said firmly, "but I understand why you must do it. Will you help us spread word that school begins Monday morning?" Sarah asked Xavier. "Some of the families, they still do not know Miss Garrison has arrived. Of course, madam, I will ride out to the Goldstein place and the Cohens this evening." Xavier finished his cake and stood. "Miss Garrison, it was a pleasure to meet you. I hope Pinos Altos treats you better than your first impression might suggest." "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Jenkins," Clara said, meaning it deeply. Their eyes met for a moment, and she felt something shift inside her chest, some recognition she could not name. After Xavier left, Sarah gave Clara a knowing look. "He is a good man, that one. Rare to find someone without hatred in their heart in these parts." "He certainly seems kind," Clara said carefully, not wanting to read too much into her aunt's tone. Over the next few days, Clara settled into life in Pinos Altos and prepared for her teaching duties. The synagogue building was simple, with wooden benches and a small ark containing the Torah scrolls, but someone had cleared space at the back for her to set up a teaching area with a chalkboard and desks borrowed from various families. She met her students on that first Monday, 12 curious faces ranging from serious to mischievous, and felt her purpose crystallize. These children deserved every opportunity, every chance to learn and grow. The first week passed smoothly within the walls of her makeshift classroom. Clara taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography, finding joy in the children's eager minds. Young Jacob Goldstein had a gift for numbers that astounded her. Miriam Cohen asked endless questions about the wider world. Little David Lieberman, her cousin, drew beautiful pictures in the margins of his slate. But outside those walls, the town made its displeasure known in small, cutting ways. When Clara went to the general store, Porter served her last, after every other customer, no matter when she had arrived. At the church social she attended with her aunt, hoping to bridge some gaps, the minister's wife made pointed comments about those who associated with Christ killers. Women who had seemed friendly crossed the street to avoid her. Merchants charged her higher prices than they charged others. Through it all, Xavier appeared regularly, tipping his hat to her on the street, stopping by to deliver messages or small gifts of fresh game for the Lieberman household. He always had a kind word, a genuine smile, and Clara found herself looking forward to these encounters more than she cared to admit. One afternoon in late September, as Clara was leaving the synagogue after classes, she found Xavier waiting outside, his hat in his hands. "Miss Garrison, I was wondering if you might permit me to walk you home." "That would be lovely, thank you." Clara fell into step beside him, aware of the curious and hostile glances from townspeople they passed. "I want you to know," Xavier said after they had walked a bit, "that what this town is doing to you, the way they are treating you, it is wrong. You came here to teach children to do good work, and they are punishing you for it." "They see me as betraying my own faith by helping Jewish families," Clara said quietly. "To them, I have chosen the wrong side. There should not be sides when it comes to basic human decency." Xavier's voice held frustration. "My mother, God rest her soul, she taught me that Jesus preached love and compassion. Seems to me these folks claiming to follow him missed that part entirely." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "Why are you different, Xavier? What made you see past the prejudice?" He was quiet for a moment, his green eyes thoughtful. "When I was 16, I got real sick, some kind of fever that had me out of my head for days. My parents could not afford a doctor, but old Mrs. Goldstein, she came anyway. She sat with me, gave me remedies from her homeland, prayed over me in words I did not understand. She did not care that we were not Jewish, she just saw a sick boy who needed help. She saved my life, the doc said so later. After that, I could not see these families as anything but good people doing their best, same as anyone. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was, past 2 winters ago, but I will never forget her kindness." Xavier's expression softened. "Miss Garrison, I hope you do not think me too forward, but would you permit me to call on you proper-like? I know your situation here is complicated enough, but I would very much like to know you better." Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She knew what accepting his courtship would mean. More disapproval from the town, more isolation, more judgment. But when she looked into Xavier's honest face, she saw something rare and precious. A man who valued character over conformity, who chose compassion over prejudice. "I would like that very much," she said softly. Xavier's answering smile was brilliant. Then perhaps you would join me for a picnic this Sunday afternoon. There is a spot up in the hills, real pretty with a view of the whole valley. I would be delighted. That Sunday, Xavier arrived at the Lieberman house with a borrowed buggy and a basket packed with food. Abraham watched them depart with approval, while Sarah whispered to Clara, "He is a good one. Do not let this town's poison make you doubt that." The ride up into the hills was beautiful, the late September air finally cooling from summer's heat. Xavier pointed out landmarks, told her stories about growing up in this wild territory, made her laugh with tales of stubborn cattle and his even more stubborn horse. Clara found herself relaxing in a way she had not since leaving Philadelphia, the weight of judgment lifting temporarily from her shoulders. The picnic spot overlooked Pinos Altos and the surrounding mountains, a vista of stunning natural beauty. Xavier spread a blanket in the shade of a juniper tree and they sat together, sharing sandwiches and apple cider. For a while they ate in comfortable silence, simply enjoying the view and the peace. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Xavier said eventually. "What made you leave?" Clara had known this question would come. She took a breath, deciding he deserved honesty. "I was engaged to be married last spring. My fiancé, William, came from a good family, Presbyterian like my own. Everything was arranged, the wedding planned." She paused, gathering her courage. "Then I discovered he was embezzling from his father's business, planning to flee west before anyone discovered the missing funds. I could not keep silent. I told his father, thinking it was the moral thing to do, the right thing." "That took courage," Xavier said quietly. The family did not see it that way. They managed to hush up the scandal, blamed it on accounting errors, but I became persona non grata, the person who had caused trouble rather than looked the other way. Other families in our social circle began avoiding me. My own parents suggested I leave town for a while until it all blew over. When Aunt Sarah's letter came about the teaching position, it seemed like providence. Xavier reached over and gently took her hand. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work but warm and steady. "You did the right thing, Clara. Sometimes doing right costs us, but that does not make it less necessary." Hearing him use her given name sent warmth through her chest. "Thank you for saying that. There have been days when I questioned everything, wondering if I should have just stayed silent." "No, you could not have lived with yourself if you had." Xavier's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "That is how I know you are special, Clara. You have principles that mean more to you than comfort or acceptance. Yet here I am, rejected by another community for different reasons. Here you are, teaching children who desperately need you, making a real difference in their lives. That matters more than the approval of small-minded people." Xavier's conviction was absolute. "And here you are with me, which I count as a blessing." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I count it as a blessing too, Xavier." They talked for hours there on that hillside, sharing stories and dreams, learning the shape of each other's hearts. Xavier spoke of wanting to expand his ranch, of dreams of breeding quality horses, of a future built on hard work and integrity. Clara talked about her love of teaching, her belief that education could transform lives, her hope to make a lasting difference even in this small corner of the territory. As the sun began its descent, Xavier drove her back to town, their hands linked between them on the buggy seat. When they reached the Lieberman house, he helped her down with gentle hands at her waist. "May I call on you again?" he asked. "Please do." He smiled and tipped his hat, and Clara floated into the house, feeling more hopeful than she had in months. But their courtship did not go unnoticed or unopposed. By the end of the following week, the minister's wife, Mrs. Hartford, arrived at the synagogue just as Clara was dismissing her students. "Miss Garrison, I must speak with you about a matter of grave concern to the community." Clara ushered the children out and turned to face the older woman, whose expression radiated disapproval. "Yes, Mrs. Hartford, it has come to my attention that you have been keeping company with Xavier Jenkins. While the young man is respectable enough, your association with him combined with your work here is causing considerable scandal. Some of the good Christian women of this town are questioning your moral character." Anger sparked in Clara's chest, but she kept her voice level. "I fail to see how teaching children or spending time with an honorable man reflects poorly on my moral character. You are teaching Jewish children, immersing yourself in their ways, and now courting outside the proper social channels. You did not seek permission or approval from any of the established families. It simply is not done." Mrs. Hartford's lips pursed. "I am here on behalf of several concerned citizens to suggest that you would be happier elsewhere, perhaps Santa Fe, where there are more people of, shall we say, diverse inclinations. You are asking me to leave. I am suggesting that you might find the atmosphere there more conducive to your particular choices." Mrs. Hartford adjusted her shawl. "Pinos Altos is a small town with traditional values. We must maintain certain standards. Standards that exclude children from education and condemn people for their faith. I can see you are determined to be difficult about this. I have delivered my message. What you do with it is your concern, but do not say you were not warned about the consequences of your choices." Mrs. Hartford swept out, leaving Clara trembling with anger and hurt. That evening, she told Xavier about the visit when he stopped by. They sat on the front porch of the Lieberman house, the evening air cooling around them. Xavier's jaw tightened as she recounted the conversation. "They have no right to drive you out. They have the right of numbers and social pressure," Clara said tiredly. "I knew this would not be easy, but I did not expect such organized opposition." Xavier took both her hands in his. "Clara, listen to me. I have something to tell you, something I have been thinking about for days now." He paused, seeming to gather his words. "I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but I also know my own heart, and I know what I see in you. You are brave and kind and principled. You stand up for what is right even when it costs you. You see people as people, not as labels or categories." "Xavier, let me finish, please." His green eyes held hers. "I am falling in love with you, Clara. Actually, I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing on that dusty street with your chin held high despite the coldness around you. And I want you to know that if this town tries to drive you out, they will have to drive me out too, because I am not going anywhere you are not." Clara's breath caught. "You cannot mean that. This is your home, your ranch. My home is where my heart is, and my heart is choosing you." Xavier's voice was absolutely certain. "I have watched this town's cruelty for too long, stayed quiet too many times. I will not be quiet anymore, and I will not let them hurt you without standing beside you." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "I am falling in love with you too. I have been so afraid to admit it, afraid it was too fast, too complicated." Xavier pulled her close, cradling her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Clara whispered. His kiss was gentle and reverent, tasting of coffee and promise. When they broke apart, both were smiling through tears. "Whatever comes," Xavier said softly, "we face it together. Faith in love is all we need, Clara. Everything else will work itself out." But working itself out proved more complicated than either anticipated. Over the following weeks, the pressure increased. Porter at the general store refused to serve Clara at all. The bank, where Xavier had been working toward a loan to expand his ranch, suddenly rejected his application without explanation. Someone painted the word "traitor" on the synagogue door one night. Children threw rocks at Xavier when he rode through town. Through it all, Xavier and Clara held fast to each other and to their principles. Xavier began attending services at the synagogue, interested in learning about the faith that had inspired such devotion in his beloved. Abraham and the other men welcomed him warmly, answering his questions, sharing their traditions. Clara found deep meaning in the community's resilience, their determination to maintain their identity and faith despite opposition. One evening in late October, as Xavier was leaving the synagogue after a long discussion with Abraham about Torah interpretation, 3 men blocked his path. Clara, still inside organizing teaching materials, heard raised voices and hurried to the door. "You are making a mistake, Jenkins," one man said. He was Harold Mitchell, owner of the largest mine in the area. "This town has been good to you. Your father was respected here, but you are throwing away your reputation for a woman and a bunch of people who do not even believe in Christ." "My father taught me to judge people by their actions, not their religion," Xavier said evenly. "These folks have shown me nothing but kindness and integrity. Cannot say the same for some so-called Christians in this town." "You better watch your mouth," another man growled. Clara recognized him as one of the miners who drank heavily at the saloon. "Or what? You will run me out of town too? Good luck with that." Xavier's voice was calm but firm. "I am not leaving, and neither is Miss Garrison. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the territorial marshal next time he comes through." "You think the marshal cares about protecting Jews and their sympathizers?" Mitchell laughed harshly. "You are more naive than I thought. I think the law is supposed to protect everyone, and if it does not, that is a failure of the law, not a justification for cruelty." Xavier moved forward, and the men reluctantly stepped aside. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have plans to escort Miss Garrison home." Clara met him at the door, her heart pounding. "Are you all right?" "I am fine. Just some men who think intimidation will change my mind." Xavier offered his arm. "Shall we?" They walked home in tense silence, both aware of eyes watching from windows and doorways. At the Lieberman house, Clara turned to Xavier. "This is getting dangerous. Those men, they could hurt you, they could try," Xavier said with more confidence than he felt. "But I meant what I said, Clara. I am not backing down." "Neither am I," she said firmly. "But we need to be smart about this. Maybe we should speak with the territorial authorities, document what is happening." Xavier nodded slowly. "That is good thinking. The marshal is due through here in about 2 weeks. We can file a formal complaint then." What they did not anticipate was how quickly things would escalate before the marshal's arrival. 3 days later, someone set fire to Xavier's barn. He woke to his horses screaming and managed to get the animals out, but the building burned to the ground, taking his winter hay stores and most of his tack with it. The volunteer fire brigade arrived too late to save anything, and Xavier saw satisfaction in some of their faces. When Clara heard the news, she rode out to his ranch without hesitation, propriety be damned. She found him covered in soot, staring at the smoking ruins. Without a word, she climbed down from the borrowed horse and walked straight into his arms. "I am so sorry," she whispered against his chest. "It is just a building. The animals are safe, and so am I." But his voice shook with suppressed emotion. "They are trying to break us, Clara. They will not succeed." She pulled back to look at him fiercely. "We are stronger than their hate, Xavier. We have to be." Over the next days, something remarkable happened. The Jewish families rallied around Xavier with overwhelming support. Abraham and several other men came to help clear the debris and plan a new barn. Women arrived with food and supplies. Young men donated their labor. Even Clara's students came with their parents, the children gathering stones to mark a new fire pit, the parents offering whatever resources they could spare. "You stood with us," Abraham said simply when Xavier tried to protest their generosity. "Now we stand with you. This is what community means." Xavier, humbled and moved, accepted their help. The barn raising became a statement, a declaration that compassion and solidarity could triumph over bigotry. As they worked, Xavier and Abraham talked about everything from carpentry to theology to the challenges of life in the territory. "You love my niece," Abraham observed one afternoon. It was not a question. "Yes, sir, very much. And you are prepared for what that might mean. The challenges you will face, the doors that might close." Xavier hammered in another nail before responding. "With respect, sir, those doors were never worth entering if they are closed because of who I love or who I befriend. Clara is the finest woman I have ever met. Being with her, being part of this community, it has taught me more about true faith and courage than 20 years of Sunday sermons." Abraham nodded, satisfied. "Then you have our blessing whenever you are ready to ask for it officially." When Xavier proposed to Clara a week later, he did it simply but perfectly. They were back at their picnic spot overlooking the valley, the November air crisp and clean. He took her hand and said, "Clara Garrison, you have changed my life in every way that matters. You have shown me what real courage looks like, what it means to stand for principle even when the whole world seems against you. I want to spend the rest of my life standing beside you, learning from you, loving you. Will you marry me?" Clara's eyes filled with happy tears. "Yes, Xavier Jenkins. Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, one that had been his grandmother's, worn smooth by years of love and labor. They kissed there on the hillside, sealing their promise to each other and to the future they would build together. When they announced their engagement, the town's response was predictably hostile. The minister refused to marry them in his church. Mrs. Hartford organized a petition demanding Clara's removal as a teacher. Several merchants posted signs saying Xavier was no longer welcome in their establishments. But the Jewish community celebrated. Sarah cried happy tears and immediately began planning a celebration. Abraham offered his home for the ceremony. The rabbi, who traveled a circuit through the territory's small Jewish communities, agreed to officiate alongside a justice of the peace from Silver City, ensuring the marriage was both meaningful and legal. The wedding took place on a cold December afternoon in 1873, inside the synagogue that had become so important to both Xavier and Clara. Someone had decorated the simple space with pine boughs and winter flowers. The handful of guests included the Jewish families who had become like family, a few ranchers from outlying areas who respected Xavier's integrity, and the justice of the peace who had ridden 2 days to perform the ceremony. Clara wore a simple dress of ivory silk that had been her mother's, sent reluctantly from Philadelphia, with a note that suggested her parents were beginning to reconsider their harsh judgment. Xavier wore his Sunday best, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes full of love as Clara walked toward him through the small congregation. The ceremony blended traditions beautifully. The rabbi spoke about the importance of building a home founded on justice and compassion, about how love that transcends boundaries reflects the divine spark in humanity. The justice performed the legal portions with surprising warmth, clearly moved by the couple's devotion. When Xavier stomped on the glass wrapped in cloth, a tradition the rabbi had explained symbolized both the fragility and joy of life, everyone shouted congratulations with genuine happiness. At the modest celebration afterward, with food provided by every family in attendance, Clara looked around at the faces gathered to celebrate their union and felt overwhelming gratitude. These people, rejected and marginalized by the wider town, had opened their hearts without reservation. They had shown her and Xavier what true community looked like. "Happy?" Xavier asked, pulling her close for a dance as someone played a fiddle. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Clara said honestly. "I thought leaving Philadelphia meant leaving everything behind, but instead I found everything I needed right here." "We found each other," Xavier corrected gently. "Everything else grew from that." They spent their wedding night at Xavier's ranch house, modest but clean, with a fire crackling warmly in the hearth. Xavier carried Clara over the threshold with exaggerated ceremony that made them both laugh. Inside, away from the world's judgment, they explored their new intimacy with tenderness and passion, learning the language of each other's bodies, sealing their commitment in the most fundamental way. Afterward, lying entwined in the darkness, Clara traced patterns on Xavier's chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For seeing me, for choosing love over fear, for being brave enough to stand against the tide." Xavier captured her hand and kissed her palm. "You are the brave one, Clara. I just had the sense to recognize something precious when I found it." The winter that followed was hard but happy. The new barn stood strong, and Xavier's cattle weathered the cold successfully. Clara continued teaching, her students thriving under her instruction. She and Xavier settled into the rhythms of married life, learning each other's habits and preferences, building a home filled with laughter and purpose. The town's hostility continued, but gradually lost some of its sharp edges. When a measles outbreak struck in February, Clara nursed sick children regardless of their family's religion, going door to door with medicines and care. Even some of the families who had shunned her found it hard to maintain their animosity toward a woman who sat up all night with their feverish child. Xavier proved himself invaluable during the outbreak as well, riding out in blizzards to fetch the doctor from Silver City, delivering supplies, helping however he could. Actions, as always, spoke louder than words or prejudices. By spring, something had shifted. Not everyone accepted them, but a grudging respect began to emerge. When Porter at the general store fell from a ladder and broke his leg, Xavier was the one who helped him home and sat with him until the doctor arrived. The man never quite apologized, but he stopped overcharging Clara and even nodded to her once on the street. In May, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The joy she and Xavier felt was immense and immediate. They shared the news first with Sarah and Abraham, who celebrated with them, then gradually with others. Her students were delighted at the prospect of a baby, the younger ones especially excited. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the warm months. Clara continued teaching until late July, when the heat and her condition finally convinced her to take a break until after the birth. She spent those weeks preparing the small second bedroom in their ranch house, sewing tiny clothes, dreaming of the life they would welcome. Xavier was attentive and devoted, bringing her wildflowers and treats, rubbing her swollen feet, talking to her belly about all the things he would teach their child. "Boy or girl does not matter," he told Clara one evening, his hand spread across her stomach. "As long as they have your kind heart and your courage. And your integrity and your capacity for love," Clara added, covering his hand with hers. Labor came on a hot August afternoon in 1874, swift and intense. Sarah attended her along with Mrs. Goldstein, who had experience as a midwife. Xavier paced outside, praying and worrying until Sarah finally called him in to meet his son. The baby was perfect, with Xavier's green eyes and a surprisingly full head of dark hair. Xavier held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "Hello, little one. I am your papa, and I promise to love you and protect you and teach you to see the good in people." "What should we name him?" Clara asked from the bed, exhausted but radiant. They had discussed names for months without deciding. But looking at his son, Xavier knew. "What about Samuel? It means heard by God, and this little one represents so many prayers answered." Clara smiled. "Samuel Jenkins. It is perfect." The town's response to Samuel's birth was mixed. Some sent congratulations and small gifts. Others remained coldly silent. But the Jewish community embraced the baby with wholehearted joy, bringing traditional gifts and blessings, welcoming him as one of their own, though he was not Jewish himself. As Samuel grew through his first months, Clara found herself changed by motherhood in unexpected ways. Teaching other people's children had been fulfilling, but nurturing her own brought a fierce protectiveness and depth of love she had not anticipated. She understood more fully now what the Jewish mothers must feel when they worried about their children facing a hostile world. Xavier proved to be a natural father, patient and playful. He carried Samuel around the ranch, narrating his chores, singing off key lullabies. On Saturdays, he would ride into town with Samuel secured in a sling against his chest, and Clara knew he was making a statement. "This is my family, and I am proud of them." By the time Samuel was 6 months old, crawling energetically around their home, Clara felt ready to return to teaching. Sarah agreed to watch the baby during school hours, treasuring the time with her grandnephew. Clara returned to her classroom with renewed purpose, her own experience of motherhood enriching her understanding of her students and their families. Life settled into a comfortable pattern through that winter and into the spring of 1875. Xavier expanded his herd with careful investments. Clara's reputation as an excellent teacher grew, and some families outside the Jewish community began quietly inquiring whether she might tutor their children privately. The income helped, and more importantly, it represented growing acceptance. One afternoon in April, Xavier came home with unexpected news. "I was approached today by the territorial governor's office. They are looking for people to join a commission on education and religious tolerance, trying to address some of the conflicts arising as the territory grows." "Abraham recommended me." Clara looked up from where she was playing with Samuel on the floor. "That is wonderful. Are you going to accept?" "I wanted to talk to you first. It would mean travel, time away from the ranch and you and Samuel. But it also feels like an opportunity to make a real difference, to advocate for what we believe in on a larger scale." "You should absolutely do it," Clara said firmly. "This is important work, Xavier. We can manage the ranch while you are gone. And think of what you could accomplish, the policies you might influence." Xavier joined them on the floor, pulling both wife and son into his arms. "Have I mentioned lately that you are the wisest woman I know?" "Not in at least several hours," Clara teased. Over the next year, Xavier served on the commission with distinction, traveling to Santa Fe and other settlements, gathering testimony about discrimination, and working to draft recommendations for territorial policy. It was slow, frustrating work, but gradually, changes began to take shape. Guidelines were established for ensuring religious minorities had access to education and commerce. Protections were written into law, though enforcement remained inconsistent. In Pinos Altos itself, the atmosphere continued to slowly improve. When the synagogue needed major repairs after a harsh winter damaged the roof, Xavier organized a community work party that included several non-Jewish families who had come to respect the Jenkins family's integrity. Working side by side, the men found common ground in shared labor and mutual respect. Clara became pregnant again in the winter of 1876. This time, the pregnancy was harder, with more sickness and fatigue. but she weathered it with Xavier's devoted care and Sarah's constant support. Their daughter arrived in August, smaller than Samuel had been but equally perfect, with Clara's delicate features and Xavier's green eyes. "Rebecca," Clara said immediately upon seeing her. "Her name is Rebecca." "Another biblical name," Xavier said with a smile. "Samuel and Rebecca Jenkins." "I like it." Rebecca's arrival seemed to complete their family in a fundamental way. Samuel, now too, was fascinated by his tiny sister, wanting to help with everything. Clara juggled motherhood and teaching with Sarah's help, while Xavier balanced his ranch work with his continuing role on the Territorial Commission. In the fall of 1877, something remarkable happened. The Territorial School in Pinos Altos got a new headmaster, a man from Boston with progressive ideas about education. He approached Clara about joining the faculty officially, teaching all the children in town together, Jewish and Christian alike. "Your reputation has preceded you, Mrs. Jenkins," he said when he came to their ranch. "I have heard from multiple sources that you are an exceptional teacher. I want to create an environment where all children feel welcome and valued. I need someone like you to help make that vision real." Clara was torn. She loved teaching the Jewish children, had built deep relationships with them and their families. But the opportunity to integrate the school, to demonstrate that children of different faiths could learn together, was incredibly appealing. She discussed it with Abraham and the other families. "You must take this position," Abraham said firmly. "This is what we have been working toward, the next generation growing up with less division. Our children will not be isolated in their own school anymore. They will be part of the broader community. That is progress." "But only if they are safe and welcomed," Clara insisted. "With you there, we trust they will be." So Clara accepted the position, and in September of 1877, the Pinos Altos Territorial School opened its doors to all children with Clara Jenkins as one of its teachers. The first days were tense, with some parents keeping their children home in protest. But gradually, as Clara's skill and fairness became evident, resistance faded. She treated every child with equal respect and compassion, holding them to high standards while supporting their individual needs. When children parroted their parents' prejudices, she addressed it firmly but kindly, teaching them to question inherited biases. When conflicts arose, she facilitated honest conversations about difference and similarity. Xavier watched his wife's work with immense pride. She was transforming the town, one child at a time, planting seeds of tolerance that would grow for generations. His own work on the Territorial Commission began to bear fruit as well, with new policies being implemented across New Mexico Territory. By 1878, the Jenkins family had become an established and increasingly respected part of Pinos Altos. Their ranch was prosperous, their children healthy and happy, their marriage stronger than ever. They had not won over everyone. There were still those who viewed them with suspicion or dislike. But they had carved out a life built on principle and love. One evening that summer, sitting on their porch watching Samuel and Rebecca play in the yard while the sun set over the mountains, Clara leaned against Xavier's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it? Standing with me, defending the Jewish families, all the hardship it brought?" Xavier wrapped his arm around her and kissed the top of her head. "Not for one single moment. Every challenge we faced led us here to this life, this family. You taught me that faith and love really is all we need. Everything else, the acceptance or rejection of others, it matters far less than what we build together." "You taught me that too," Clara said softly. "When I came here, I felt so lost, so uncertain. But you saw me, really saw me, and you chose me anyway. You chose us over the easier path." "It was never really a choice," Xavier said. "It was inevitable from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach with your chin held high and determination in your eyes. I was yours from that first meeting, even if I did not quite know it yet." They sat in companionable silence, watching their children, counting their blessings. Inside the house, Clara's latest class assignments waited to be reviewed. In the barn, Xavier's horses stamped and settled for the night. In town, families who had once shunned them now called them neighbors, if not always friends. As 1879 arrived, bringing with it both challenges and opportunities, the Jenkins family faced the future with confidence born of hard-won experience. Clara discovered she was pregnant again in March, a surprise but a welcome one. This pregnancy was easier than Rebecca's, and in November they welcomed another son, whom they named Jacob after Clara's favorite student from her early teaching days. Their family complete at 5. Clara eventually reduced her teaching hours to focus more on her own children while still maintaining her influence at the school. Xavier's reputation as a fair-minded mediator and advocate for tolerance led to him being appointed to the territorial legislature in 1880, a position he held with honor for 6 years. Through the 1880s, as Pinos Altos grew and changed with the territory around it, the Jenkins family remained a constant presence, a living testament to the power of choosing love over fear, principle over prejudice. Samuel, Rebecca, and Jacob grew up in a household where difference was celebrated, where religious diversity was normal, where standing up for what was right mattered more than fitting in. When Samuel was 8, he asked his father why some people still seemed uncomfortable around their family. Xavier sat him down and told him the whole story, how he and Clara had met, the opposition they had faced, the choices they had made. "We chose love," Xavier concluded, "and we chose to see people as individuals, not as groups to fear or reject. That made some people uncomfortable because it challenged their assumptions, but we never regretted it, not once." "I want to be like you and Mama when I grow up," Samuel said seriously. "Brave and kind. You already are, son. You already are." The years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes of time. Sarah and Abraham grew older, eventually passing peacefully within months of each other in 1888, leaving behind a legacy of dignity and resilience. Clara mourned deeply, remembering how her aunt had offered her sanctuary when she needed it most, how their family had welcomed both her and Xavier without reservation. At the funeral, attended by what seemed like half of Pinos Altos, Clara stood between Xavier and her grown children, watching as members of the Jewish community and the broader town alike paid their respects. It was a moment that highlighted how much had changed since that day in 1873 when she had arrived to such cold hostility. "They would be proud of what you have built," Xavier whispered to Clara as they walked away from the cemetery. "Of how you transformed this place." "We transformed it," Clara corrected. "Together." As the 1890s arrived, bringing with them the promise of a new century on the horizon, the Jenkins family looked back on nearly 2 decades of shared life with deep satisfaction. Samuel had become a teacher himself, following in his mother's footsteps. Rebecca showed a gift for music that brought joy to the whole community. Jacob, still young, talked about becoming a lawyer to fight for justice and equality. Xavier and Clara, now in their early 40s, still deeply in love, often reflected on the unlikely path that had brought them together. What had started with rejection and prejudice had become a story of triumph and transformation, not just for them, but for the entire community they called home. One evening in 1893, as they celebrated their 20th anniversary with a party attended by friends and family from all backgrounds, Clara pulled Xavier aside. "Do you remember that first day when you walked beside me carrying my bag?" "I remember everything about that day," Xavier said. "I remember thinking I had never seen anyone look so determined and so vulnerable at the same time. I remember thinking you were the first kind face I had seen since leaving Philadelphia. I had no idea that kindness would change my entire life." Xavier cupped her face gently. "We changed each other's lives. We chose a harder path, but we walked it together, and look what we found along the way. A family, a community, a purpose bigger than ourselves." "Faith in love," Clara murmured, echoing the words Xavier had spoken so long ago. "You were right. It really was all we needed." They kissed there in the shadows while their anniversary party continued around them. Two people who had dared to choose compassion over conformity, who had built a life on the foundation of mutual respect and devotion, who had proven that love really could transcend the boundaries society tried to impose. The new century arrived with celebration and hope, and the Jenkins family entered it together, stronger than ever. Xavier and Clara watched their children grow into adults who embodied the values they had fought so hard to uphold. Samuel married a young woman he met while teaching, a Methodist girl whose family embraced the Jenkins clan warmly. Rebecca found love with a young Jewish man from Santa Fe, and their wedding blended traditions beautifully, just as Xavier and Clara's had. Jacob eventually became that lawyer he had dreamed of being, dedicating his career to civil rights and justice. As grandchildren began arriving, Clara found herself thinking often about that frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Pinos Altos so many years ago. She had been running from scandal and rejection, uncertain of her future, armed with nothing but determination and faith. She could never have imagined the rich, full life that awaited her, the deep love she would find, the lasting impact she would have. Xavier, watching his wife play with their grandchildren in the yard of their expanded ranch house, felt gratitude so profound it sometimes brought tears to his eyes. He had made the right choice that day. He decided to walk beside Clara, to stand with her against the tide of prejudice, to choose love over the easier path of conformity. Every moment since had confirmed that decision, had added another layer of meaning and joy to their shared life. On a warm spring evening in 1903, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Clara suddenly laughed. Xavier looked at her quizzically. "What is it?" "I was just thinking about Mrs. Hartford, how scandalized she was by our courtship. I wonder what she would say now, seeing our children and grandchildren, seeing how this community has changed." "She would probably still find something to disapprove of," Xavier said with a grin. "Some people never change, but enough others did, and that made all the difference." "We made the difference," Clara said firmly, "by refusing to accept that hatred and division were inevitable, by showing that there was another way." Xavier pulled her close, marveling as he always did that this incredible woman had chosen to build a life with him. "Best decision I ever made, walking up to you that day and offering to carry your bag. Best decision I ever made, accepting your help and then your heart," Clara replied. They sat together in the gathering dusk, two people who had found each other across barriers of prejudice and fear, who had built something beautiful and lasting through courage and commitment. Behind them, their house glowed with lamplight and the sound of family gathered for dinner. Around them, the land they had tended for 3 decades stretched in peaceful contentment. The town that had once rejected Clara for her choices now recognized her as one of its most distinguished citizens. The cowboy who had said faith in love was all they needed had proven those words true through decades of devoted partnership. Together, They had transformed not just their own lives but the community around them, proving that standing for principle and compassion could change the world, one relationship, one choice, one brave stand at a time. As the stars emerged overhead, Clara and Xavier Jenkins sat hand in hand, surrounded by the evidence of their extraordinary love story, a testament to the transformative power of choosing love over fear, unity over division, and faith in each other over the doubts and prejudices of others. Their story, begun in conflict and opposition, had become a legacy of hope, proving that the most profound changes often start with one person choosing to see another person's humanity, and then refusing to look away. The children called them in for dinner, and Xavier helped Clara to her feet with the gallantry he had shown that very first day. Walking into their home together, they were still that young teacher and that courageous cowboy, still choosing each other, still building on the foundation they had laid so long ago in the dusty streets of Pinos Altos, New Mexico territory, when the town rejected her for her religion, and the cowboy said faith in love was all they needed. And they had been absolutely, beautifully right.